Welcome to the Smart Business Revolution.
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 You want a revolution?
You say you want a revolution?
Revolution. The revolution.
It's going on right now.
Welcome to The Revolution, the Smart Business Revolution podcast, where we ask today's most successful entrepreneurs to share the tools and strategies they use to build relationships and connections to grow their revenue. Now, your host for The Revolution, John Corcoran.
All right, welcome everyone. John Corcoran here. I'm the host of this show, and every week I get so much joy out of talking to smart CEOs, founders, and entrepreneurs of all kinds of companies. Take a look at some of our archives. We've got some great episodes with the founders or CEOs from Netflix, Kinko's, YPO, EO, Activation Blizzard, LendingTree, OpenTable, Axe Software. Go check them out. I'm also the co-founder of Rise25, where we help connect B2B business owners to their ideal prospects. Quick shout out to Todd Anthony of Pinwheel Content, one of my past guests, who pointed me in the direction of today's guest. His name is Robert Rose. And for more than 10 years, Robert and his firm, The Content Advisory, have worked with more than 500 companies, including 15 of the Fortune 100. He's provided strategic marketing advice and counsel for global brands such as, maybe you've heard a few of these, Facebook, Salesforce, NASA, CVS Health, McCormick Spices, Hewlett-Packard, Microsoft, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. He's also the author of 3 best-selling books, including Killing Marketing, which he wrote with his colleague, Joe Pulizzi. Robert also hosts a podcast with Joe, This Old Marketing. Go check it out, which has run for the last 8 years. And of course, this episode is brought to you by Rise25 Media, where we help B2B businesses to get clients, referrals, and strategic partnerships with done-for-you podcasts and content marketing. If you ever had any questions about starting a podcast, shoot us an email at support@rise25media.com. All right, Robert, it's such a pleasure to have you here today. And we're going to talk about content, why you should do it, how you can do it, some different strategies that are working really well today. But let's first start with, before we get to the story of how you and Joe met, because that's a cool story. You had kind of discovered the importance of content in today's new economy while working for a startup in Los Angeles. You were CMO, and you kind of jokingly said that you built a little media empire within that startup. And then realized how powerful it was. So talk a little bit about how you kind of stumbled upon this strategy that works so well and that you ended up, devoting yourself to through the work that you do now.
Yeah. Well, first of all, thanks for having me on. It's a real pleasure to be here. And it's always nice to connect with somebody else in Southern California, which is always a big plus, or from Southern California, I should say.
Yeah, we're from very close nearby.
Because that's a rarity these days.
Yeah.
So I originally came out to Los Angeles to, like so many people did. I was going to be a rock star. I was going to be a writer. I was going to be some form of an artist. And that turned out about as well as you think it might. And I ended up in marketing in the entertainment business. And then right after the .com sort of boom and bust, I ended up as the CMO with a bunch of friends at a startup company and did the whole typical 2 rounds of Silicon Valley funding and the whole thing. We were an enterprise software company. So see into that 6-figure price tag, and meaningful implementations, long sales cycle, typically heavy B2B organization. And in that, we were competing at the time against the likes of, IBM and Hewlett-Packard and Microsoft and, these huge organizations that I knew we were never going to beat in terms of, certainly spend. I knew we weren't going to beat them on SEO. I knew we weren't going to beat them on depth in terms of team skills and all of that sort of thing. I mean, we were just, 6 chuckleheads in a basement. And so the question became, how can we actually become competitive? And the way that we decided to do it, or that I decided that was an option to do it, was we could be a mile deeper than they were, because we could become thought leaders. We could become sort of the shapers of this particular industry, which ironically was web content management at the time. And so we did that. I basically built, instead of building a traditional marketing department, I ended up building a content engine. And at least that's what we called it at the time. And we were, this is the early 2000s, and we were doing a blog, and we had a resource center, and we were doing not podcasting, but webinars that were also available in audio only. And then we were doing, events and white papers, and we had a whole thought leadership program, and we were a little publishing company. And I had multimedia specialists working for me. I had journalists working for me. I had, designers. And my theory was I can teach them how to be marketers. Like I can teach them SEO. I can teach them how to do search engine marketing, and I can teach them how to do the arbitrage on how to do, reach and frequency and figure that out. What I can't teach them how to do is be great communicators. And so it worked, weirdly enough. And we built this little team and we grew the company, and it was quite a successful program. And it was all sort of centered on our ability to be, when we would get to the table, whenever we were given an RFP or invited to come pitch, we could sort of lean on the fact that, if you did a search on our particular topics, we were the ones who came up. We were the ones who were at the event speaking. We were the ones conducting educational webinars. We were the one issuing white papers on how to do all of this in the right way. And we sort of became known for that. We became known as sort of the experts in the space, and it really helped build the business. It was sort of what drove lead generation for us for many, many years. And that's what, from 2002 really till about 2008, which is when I met Joe. And funny enough, it was because I had done this, thing and built this little team within the organization, and then ultimately read his first book called Get Content, Get Customers. And I went, hey, I'm doing that. I should probably talk to this guy and see what's going on.
I love that. I love when someone admires someone from afar, reads their book or whatever, and then not only gets to know them, but then goes into business with them. I think that is so cool when people do that. But what did startups tend to be really fast moving places. And it sounds like since you were in the content management space, you probably wasn't real difficult to convince your co-founders of the virtues of creating content, but it also can take a while. So what do you say? Because that's a big pushback you hear from other people who aren't creating content. Like, I don't have that kind of time, or it take too long to create the content. I'm not going to get results, or they start it and then they give up. So what do you say? What did you say to your co-founders then? And what do you say to people now about the investment of time in order to get results from it?
Well, so well, you'd like to think that it was an easy argument to make. It was not.
Well, that's fascinating in itself too.
Yeah,
right?
Especially to our traditional Silicon Valley board, who at the time went, "You're going to do what with where?" And so, there was two arguments that I made at the time, and it's the same two arguments that I'll make these days when we talk to clients and CFOs and CEOs about, anything related to content marketing. Is that one? Yes, it is a long game. It is the marathon. It is the way I always put it is, if direct marketing, search engine marketing, banner ads, cold calling, the sort of traditional classic direct marketing of getting out there and reach and frequency, that's day trading, right? Those campaigns are day trading. You're trying to flip a stock as quickly as you possibly can to get as much ROI as you can in that moment. It's demand identification, right? That's all it is. But if you're going to truly generate demand, you've got to have a long-term value investment as part of your portfolio. That's what content is. It is developing a foundation of marketing material that, quite frankly, works 24/7, 365, and it is not dependent upon your ability to put a new campaign into market. Those things will be there. They will be found. They will be able to represent you when you can't represent you. And that was always the argument, to say, we need to build, when I sort of jokingly said we need to be a mile deeper, I mean that. I mean, when people would go, oh, I've heard about this company, but I'm looking at IBM and I'm looking at HP and I'm looking at this other giant company that might, support us from an enterprise software perspective. And I've heard of this other little company. Let's go see what they have. And then you hit the company, and our website looked big and robust, and there was white papers, and there was a blog, and there was, webinars that they could watch, and it was deep, and we were teaching people about the trends in the industry. People go, well, they're for real. They're absolutely for real. And so we got invited to the table. Now, we won some and we lost some. There's no doubt about that. but it was just getting ourselves out there that was the most important thing. So we did all the other things, right? We did search engine marketing, we did SEO, I did email marketing, we bought leads, we did all the things that you do in direct marketing. But as part of my overall integrated marketing mix, which is always where I turn back to, like, is what does my portfolio of marketing activities looks like? Content marketing was a big piece of it. And I always made that a pretty big bet into what we were doing, and sort of set the expectation that, yeah, we're going to do stuff to drive top level leads into the top of the funnel as fast as we possibly can. We know we need to keep the lights on, but you can't not make me do this long-term investment thing, because that will pay off in a multiplier way in year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5. And it just builds on itself, and that momentum builds. But you've got to put the time and the effort into doing those push-ups and doing those sit-ups in the early days, because you just have to. You just have to do that to build a foundation.
Right. I like that metaphor between the short term and the long term. Okay, so I'm going to be devil's advocate. I'm listening to this. I'm a listener, and I'm thinking, okay, sure, Robert, that sounds great. Back in 2000, whatever, too, it must have been easier back then. But if you're starting today, why should I start now? It's too late. Also, do you have to be an SEO expert these days because it's more competitive? What do you say to people who are listening and thinking that?
So there's two things, which is, one, my question back would be, well, what's the alternative, right? You really believe that advertising is getting more effective these days? Do you believe that SEO is getting easier? Because none of it's getting any easier.
Especially SEO without content.
Well, exactly. Really, even SEO with content.
Yeah.
So the key is that when we start looking at our today's world, 2021 and going forward, what we can see is that, yes, a lot of businesses have grabbed onto this whole idea of content, whether it be from an SEO and being found perspective, sort of the classic inbound marketing idea, or whether it be from developing differentiation by developing content properties that simply just differentiates their brand against everybody else. In other words, you'll not only get, software from us, you'll get this amazing experience of education and certification and all of that. Whatever the sort of impetus is for doing it, the key is that in today's world, it's the noisiness that almost compels us to do it better. In other words, yes, back in 2001, 2002, all you really needed to do was sort of be there to answer every question, right? There's the classic sort of methodology of, become the FAQ of your industry, right? Become the source of the truth for any question your customers may have, and they'll find you, and that was sort of the early promises of inbound marketing. And yes, today, unless you're in some totally niche industry that hasn't been covered yet, it's really hard to get above the fray when you start answering those questions. If you're in real estate or in financial services or technology or marketing, the trying to answer simply the questions that your customers will have, you're competing with 9,000 other people that are vying for that attention with the same answer, by the way. So what you have to find is that this really compels you to go find the different. What is the different that is out there that's going to differentiate your particular ideas on the world with a particular customer set? So it almost compels us to lean further into it, to lean further into the idea of developing these differentiated content experiences that, quite frankly, deliver value so that they see us in a different light than they see everybody else out there. And I don't pretend that it's not hard. It's absolutely one of the most difficult things we'll do, but welcome to the big leagues of marketing. It's all harder these days.
Yeah, it's great way of putting it. You produce a lot of content. From what I can tell from looking at you online, you like writing. What do you say to people who maybe they don't like writing or they don't like certain mediums? In other words, around what medium to choose for their content marketing? What do you say to people when they think about that?
So I have two pieces of advice there. One is it's choosing one, that's for sure. In other words, if you don't like writing, it's probably, you need to find someone who does, right? And I'll give you an example of that. My old CEO hated writing. He was really good at it, but he didn't like doing it. And didn't have the time. I mean, he was too busy working the company to actually have time to blog or to write a white paper or a thought leadership paper. So what I did with him is I said, listen, every Thursday night, you've got an hour and a half commute home. Just leave me a long ass voicemail. Just leave me a really long voicemail about what's on your mind, what you're thinking about the industry, some thoughts. And I would get this really long voicemail. And I would give that over to a writer who I would say, find the 4 or 5 nuggets in that and let's write a piece or 2 or 3 or however many ideas are in there. We would ghost write that piece. We would show it to him. He would put his edits and sort of personality into it. And away you go. You've got a blog from the CEO who never wrote a word of it. But it's his ideas, right? It's not that we're, ghostwriting or anything for him. What we're doing is we're putting the words to screen instead of words to paper that he would have written if he had the time. You can do the same thing with podcasting as well, right? I will often say, you go interview one of your customers and you get tons of audio. That makes for a great podcast, but then the transcription of that makes for a great blog post. And assuming the value of the content is there because it's educational or inspirational or entertaining or whatever it is, you've got yourself a great set of content without having to try very hard. And then you sort of say, okay, what's the best one to go with? Where should we start? Where should we start looking at? My piece of advice there is that the blocking and tackling, or the table stakes, if you will, of any of this is having something in your owned media experience. I don't care if it's a blog or a website or a resource center or, a digital magazine or a print magazine.
It sounds like your own platform. You're talking about not, as they say, sharecropping on, another big tech company's platform.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. Just ask whose audience you're building. Are you building yours or are you building theirs?
Right.
And so, so that means I wouldn't start with a podcast or a social media idea or anything where, even on something like Medium or something like that. I would not start there because the entire focus of those platforms is for your content to build their audience and then sell them back to you, sell access to them back to you. So that's not where I would start. That doesn't mean that there isn't good work to be done there, and pulling that audience to your owned media properties is ultimately the goal. But the first thing to do, the place to focus and build your initial platform is in something where you're building your own audience.
That's an interesting point. What I was going to ask about is, what do you take to like a hybrid approach? Like for me, like podcasting is one, you're creating an article, which should go on your own website, helps with SEO value, but you're also creating media that goes across often dozens of different platforms. So yeah, it might be Amazon Music, it might be Pandora, it might be Spotify, but it's all of those, not just one of those. I say to people all the time, don't just start a YouTube channel. That's horrible. All your eggs are in one basket. If they change the rule, Google changes the rules of the road, you're screwed, that sort of thing. But putting across dozens of different platforms, that works. And then even if you take like YouTube, like for example, this podcast, we're going to record this, we're going to put it up on YouTube and we're going to embed it in the blog post, but I would never do it without doing the blog post itself. Does that comport or does that,
yeah, it absolutely does. I mean,
okay.
You even did it at the beginning of this episode, right? I mean, the key is that what action do you want the audience to take? Every piece of content we create should have an intended action that we want our audience to take. Subscribe, forward, read more, buy now, whatever the sort of appropriate action is for the style of content that we're actually putting out. And before we even got started talking, the first thing you said was, "Hey, listen, here's who's bringing you this podcast. Here's what we want you to do. We want you to go to the website and we want you to sign up." And so that's building an owned media audience to, I'm guessing it's an email newsletter or it's a blog or whatever it is, but you're already telling the audience what your intention is for them. If they get any enjoyment out of this, you're telling them what I want you to do is go, and some of them will, some of them won't, But the point is that you're using the podcast as a reach mechanism. It's a way to reach new audiences, engage those audiences so that they become interested in something. And then the point is that you want them to flow back into your own media experience. That's what it is. Social media, podcasting, Medium, all those things, those are rivers, not lakes. You want those flowing back into your own media experiences so that you're building the engagement with that audience as you move out over time.
Yeah. You hear that, everyone? He's like the definitive guru, and he said I did something right. That felt really cool. Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate that. I have to ask you about idea generation, because I'm sure that's one that you hear people about all the time. I have no ideas. I can't come up with anything. How do I come up with anything? But I'm actually more curious. Are you the kind of person who says like, okay, you should have like kind of like a whole outline of different things and research the keywords and then come up with the topics that way? Or is it more organic? I love the suggestion of just like, recording a voicemail, but how do you come up with these ideas? Is it deliberative and you come up with a list of 100 different topics and you say over the next 2 years, we're going to cover all these? How do you do it?
So I have two approaches. The first is that I understand what I'm trying, and I don't mean this in any sort of way to say that I have more talent or more abilities than anybody else. But what I am self-aware of is what I'm trying to do. And what I mean by that there's a very specific thing to that. So I want to be considered leading thought. I'm not going to say I consider myself a thought leader, because that has zero validity anywhere. I am only as much as thought leader as the content that I produce, the thoughts that I produce lead something. But what it does is that it directs me down a very specific way of ideating what it is I want to create. In other words, I'm not here to cover the news. I'm not that guy, right? I'm not the guy that you turn to say, oh, that's who I turn to keep up with what's going on topically in the world. I'm there to produce what you might want to think about the impact of a particular piece of news, or what you want to. So therefore, most of what I do is trend-based, but it is also observational-based, given the nature of my work, which is consulting. So the ideas that I get come from my observations of the work that I do. In other words, as a practitioner of marketing and a practitioner of content marketing, I actually roll up my sleeves and do work with clients. And so my content that I create is generated out of the problems, the challenges, the solutions that I see to that work. And so it is, do I have a bucket of ideas? Absolutely, yes, right? I take notes, copious notes. I have a whole Evernote folder of stuff that I just sort of pile away as ideas of things that I might want to write about. And then I'm very considered about what it is I write. Again, I'm not I'm not the guy who blogs every day. I'm not, someone who ultimately, puts out an email newsletter daily or anything like that. I'm putting out fresh new content, once a week, and then in greater levels of detail, like a white paper or sort of a longer blog post or something like that, once a month, that kind of thing. And so hopefully what I'm doing is being consistent about that and being focused on that, so that when I do put out something, it's a little more valuable. The second piece, which I think is just as important, is understanding that I can reuse ideas. So much of what you see, for example, of me on social media or me giving speeches or doing webinars is I'm taking an idea and I'm running with it for a year. I'll do a keynote speech at the beginning of January that I'll use and repeat all darn year, because I know I'm not reaching everybody. I know that, people don't see it. People don't, and if those things start to click and hit, well, then I'll branch out of those things and say, great, now I can reuse this as an ebook, or reuse that as a white paper, or reuse that as 3 blog posts. So I'm not afraid to reuse ideas in different formats just because I did something in the first quarter. Much of what you'll see me tweet out is stuff I wrote in January or February or March. And I'm just like, if you missed it, here's what I talked about in March and April that I think is kind of relevant today. And so building on my library to say, if you missed it, you might want to see this. Those two things together give me the appearance of a lot more frequency than I really do, but it also gives me the ability to sort of slow down and think about the stuff that might be different, hopefully might be differentiating.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Gary Vaynerchuk is known for putting a lot of content out there, and I interviewed him years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I interviewed him years ago, and I also interviewed his right-hand man, his COO. And what was fascinating was I said, like, he seems like he's constantly creating content. And he was like, no, he's not. He's actually running his company. There's this impression that he's just going out and creating content, but he's actually running his company, but they do a tremendous job of repurposing and taking one thing, slicing it up multiple different ways.
Well, they just document Gary being Gary, right?
That too,
I mean, that's all it is, right? I mean, literally content for him is they get in the car and they're going to drive to the airport and they just stick a camera in his face and go, here's a topic, go for 15 seconds.
Yeah. What do you think about that approach?
It's not for me, because look, I think Gary has done an amazing job at building the empire he's built. It would be silly of me to ever critique the success that guy has had. He's done amazing things.
He's going to buy the jets before he's done.
Yeah, well, yeah, we'll see about that, right? I don't know why anybody would want to buy the jets, but that's a whole other.
Well, yeah, right. Get a bargain, get a good deal.
But to me, from my lens, that sort of what comes across as it's very tweetable. It's very, there are little slogans that you can put on a t-shirt or a coffee mug. It's bumper sticker advice in much, those ideas. There's not a level of depth there that in my, look, I've always considered myself a student of marketing. And so for me, and I'm not his target audience, let's be clear. For me, I miss a level of depth there that would be, that would be more appreciated as a subscriber to his thinking. But again, I'm not the target audience for him. They want that quick hit. They want that quick bite. They want to be pumped up in the moment. They want to hear him drop an F-bomb and tell somebody that they're stupid for going to college and all that stuff. Fine, great. But I don't see the depth in that thinking.
Yeah. Yeah. I've always been curious about that, whether it attracts, obviously they're doing well, they're attracting clients, but it seems to me he's speaking to like a 21-year-old frustrated kid who's not sure what to do with their career, which is not the buyer for his companies, which always seems kind of odd to me.
Doesn't matter though. That in many ways, that's the brilliance of what he's doing is he's demonstrating that he's demonstrating his ability to engage and entertain and keep an audience, which basically demonstrates his expertise at doing that. And what brands are doing is going, if he can do that for himself, he can do it for me. Got it.
Interesting. Well, I want to get into talking about some of the client work that you guys done, because some amazing clients that you've worked with, Salesforce, NASA, CVS Health, I mentioned it at the beginning. But before I do that, I love this story of how you first met Joe. So first of all, those who don't know who Joe is, who is he? And second of all, you discovered his book, decided I got to meet this guy. Tell us the story.
So Joe Pulizzi, he's now one of my best friends in the whole world, though we give each other hell about everything. So, you'll very commonly hear what an idiot he is. But he is truly my best friend.
I was going to say similar to my relationship with my business partner, although I don't call him an idiot.
That's right. And we have fun disagreements on so many things. But in any event, he and I met, like I said, when I read his first book after I was the CMO of that software company, I met him at an event, tracked him down. Basically, he and I went and had dinner at that event, literally in 2008. And we still talk about this. And over a steak dinner, we just, we found that we had so much in common and we just became fast friends almost immediately. And quite literally on my way home, when I got home, there was a voicemail waiting for me from him saying, "Hey, listen, I'm going to start this new thing. I'm thinking of calling it the Content Marketing Institute. And would you feel like coming on?" And his initial thought was I could come on as a strategic advisor or something like that. And I called him back and I said, "Look, I'm kind of ready to go all in on this. And so maybe let's just partner up with this." And so I joined CMI as he formed it as the chief strategy officer there. And basically my business, we sort of had two halves of the business, not two halves, let's call it 80% and 20% of the business, which was, we always designed the company to be built around the event, the content marketing world, and the media, which was of course subsequently the blog and the email newsletter and all that sort of thing. And then along the way, many other iterations of things, from a print magazine we had for a number of years to, the subsequent events that we acquired, and built the company, over the next 8 years. And ultimately my job there was to build out, in addition to sort of helping guide the company and sort of, whatever strategic advice I could provide, was to build out the education, the curriculum, the training, and the consulting practice, which we had for many years. And then ultimately the company was sold in 2016 when Joe decided to sell off the company. And then sort of I've been operating under my own little company that I spun up ever since.
Got it. And it's interesting. He's started the Tilt. Are you involved in that at all? Or is that something he's doing?
Yeah. I mean, I'm involved as a friend and family,
Okay.
I mean, I'm certainly interested in helping him out in what he's doing. He's reaching into a really very specific, he's drinking his own champagne, right? He's building a very niche specific audience of content entrepreneurs, and really going after that idea of, building a content oriented business for the creator economy. And that's just not my world. My world is enterprise, right? My world has, for the last 10 years, and what interests me and what my passion is helping really large organizations unwind big problems. And so, my focus has been, working with the likes of Salesforce and SAP and Microsoft and Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, and, big organizations that have thorny problems that they're trying to solve as it relates to content. And he's really solving another really thorny problem, which is how do content entrepreneurs make money. So to the extent that we're doing our podcast together, to the extent that we're, I'm helping where I can provide advice, et cetera, to the Tilt, he's got a great team now working on that. And I'm sure that company will be fantastically successful.
Yeah. How did, before we get to some of the case studies, how did the, March 2020 COVID hits, you were doing a lot of events through the company and stuff like that. Did that affect any of your foundational beliefs about content? And if so, how?
Yes. I mean, first of all, let's just all acknowledge that it just sucked. That 2020 was horrible in so many ways. It was particularly horrible for our business in the early going, because training and education and and everything around, quite frankly, business and marketing enablement kind of dried up. Everybody was sort of sitting around going, "What are we going to do?" And so, for us particularly, it was difficult. Now that changed toward the end of 2020 and certainly the beginning of this year, where it not only sort of ramped back up, but it sort of exploded back up, because kind of everybody looked around and went, "Oh, right. Yeah, we need to do things. We actually need to build a business here, despite what next normal might look like." It definitely did fundamentally change my view of the way, I would say two things. One is that it's an observation more than a sort of a change my view. It's just a new observation about something fundamentally shifted during that year, which is the amount of companies that are coming back and focusing on brand differentiation rather than lead generation as it pertains to content. So, if for example, if we worked with 10 different companies in 2019, because we'll just chalk up 2020 to the year of weirdness. And in 2019, if we worked with 10 or 20 companies, 90% of them would have been like, how do I use content to draw better leads, faster leads, the Glengarry leads? How do I get more leads? Leads. How do I get more leads?
Yeah.
And, really around that demand generation idea. And in 2021, same number of clients, 10 or 20 different clients, 90% of them are, How do I start to use content to get to be purpose driven? How do I use it for brand differentiation? How do we start rising ourselves above the noise from a customer experience perspective to really make, to make ourselves different? And
so that sounds must be very gratifying for you, given what you
very
espouse.
gratifying.
Yeah.
It's, I mean, look, I love working on demand gen and lead identification and facilitating a better funnel, but, working on brand story is just, it's just infinitely more interesting, right? I mean, it's, I mean, there's certainly the basic blocking and tackling we all have to do to make sure that the funnel and conversions are optimized and we're doing our testing and we're doing all the things that we need to do. But there is something gratifying around working with culture and brand and figuring out how to tell a better story and figuring out how to make businesses different through the experiences they're creating. It's just more fun, quite frankly.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting because, you espouse building your own platform, online content, all that kind of stuff. But the way that it's almost like the way that your business was structured, depending on travel, depending on in-person training, depending on conferences and stuff like that, you were kind of hard hit by the downturn, by the pandemic.
No doubt.
Kind of in contravention to what you recommend other companies to do. Is that a fair assessment?
You mean in terms of the way I structure the organization, or you mean?
Yeah, just that the work that you did, and maybe it was partly a choice of you enjoyed the travel, you enjoyed the in-person training and stuff like that, which is totally fair. But just that you were really adversely affected by the downturn. In spite of the advice that you give to a lot of these companies is to build online platforms,
well, consulting is not something that historically is something that clients want delivered without being in person. In other words, it's pretty rare that you run into, not these days, because again, we can
different world now.
We can observe that fundamental shift, but I didn't travel 200,000 miles a year because I particularly enjoyed it. I traveled 200,000 miles a year because clients expected it. If you proposed a meaningful consulting engagement to a Fortune 500 company, there's an expectation that at some point you're showing up at their door and you're going to spend all day in a conference room and a whiteboard and you're going to be doing stuff. They don't know what that stuff is. But, everything from, whether you're going to show up and be Bob and talk to a million different employees and get, sort of the input from the organization, or whether you're going to just show up and do a CEO presentation, or you're going to come up in person and do a training or whatever it is, there's an expectation there. That's just sort of a norm that's been set in the consulting practice for, 30 years, right? From the Accentures to the IBMs to the Deloittes to the Bains to the IT consulting to everything. There's an expectation there that has fundamentally turned on its head in the last 18 months. I would tell you that the consulting engagements we're doing, which have for the last 18 months been purely 100% virtual. I mean, I've literally taken 3 trips in the last 2 years, whereas I would take 3 trips a month in pre-2020. I would tell you the experience of the consulting engagement itself is not as good, and I would tell you that the experience of virtual events, not as good. It's just it's a different thing. It's not, it's just not as good. It's not as good as a physical event. It's not as good as being there in person. It's just not, the experience isn't as good. Weirdly, I would tell you also, it's more efficient. In other words, the consulting engagements we're doing now online are extraordinarily more efficient. We're not having to figure out travel schedules. We're not having to figure out where we're going to stay. We're not having to figure out there's overhead in terms of getting all the people together in one spot. It's extraordinarily efficient, but it's just the experience is suboptimal. Yeah. And I mean, we could go into a whole discussion about why virtual I don't think is as good as the physical experience in terms of business, but overall, no, I'm happy to not travel. But I miss some of the benefits of, getting to really know and get to be, developing a relationship with clients because I'm meeting them in person. There's
Yeah,
there's
definitely.
absolutely an energy
Right.
there that just isn't there virtually.
Yeah, I just went to my first conference a week and a half ago for the first time in 2 years, and it was amazing. So nice to be face to face with people again. I want to ask you about some of this client work that you've done, and maybe you could pick one of the clients you've worked with that wasn't doing content or wasn't convinced to the virtue of creating content or was doing a crappy job of creating content. And, one of these clients you came in had all the usual objections that we've been articulating, talking about during this interview. But, give me some examples of some of the work that you do.
Sure. Well, and so I'll open with, and this is interesting because it is actually a slide in our overview in our pitch deck. And the headline of the slide is "We are not the heroes of the story." We are at the end of the day a strategy and road mapping consultancy. So we come in and we help with the operation, the people, the process, the technology, and make recommendations around things like what platforms people should be on, how those platforms should interact, how you should be capturing first-party data, all of the things that you might expect around a strategic agency that's coming in and helping an organization put a plan together around how they should build, scale, optimize their content and content marketing strategy. Having said that, I preface it with that because the heroes of the story are the people at the clients. So any success that I point to is not pointing to us. It's we build a roadmap. It's up to them to follow it. And if they follow it and execute against it well, that's where the success is. So we're just helping to sort of draw the map. So I would point to a couple. The first is some of the work that we did because I've gotten to follow their journey for quite a while now. The folks at Red Hat Linux, which of course was acquired by IBM in 2 years ago, I think. Huge multi-billion-dollar deal, obviously. But 7 years ago, they were quite frankly, a handful of people. The woman who runs their content strategy there, she's a woman by the name of Laura Hamlin. She's amazing. And she's a journalist. She was hired to sort of reboot and rethink their print magazine at the time and sort of figure out what they were doing with content. And as she started to build a handful of team, she started getting, running into problems, right? Scaling issues, what they were doing from a marketing perspective, the fact that they were actually pretty good when it comes to, creating content that the organization liked. So they were really struggling with meeting demand from sales and from the web team and from others that wanted them to write stuff, SEO articles and PowerPoint presentations and case studies and all the things that the business wanted. So she really started trying to scale that up. And that's when we started working with her and we sort of helped them figure out what the right resource allocation and team structure might look like, the business case for that, how they might start looking at workflow and governance a little different to handle things like translation and localization and what platforms, thought leadership platforms they might want to launch and take over. And we sort of worked for them, not terribly long, but built this roadmap. And then over the next, quite frankly, 4 or 5 years, the last 4 or 5 years since we worked with them, they've really just followed that roadmap and just built it very process oriented. Now she's a team of 45 people. She's a team to her content department is 45 people. Wow. They have everything from data scientists to journalists to copywriters to librarians. They've got translation people. They've got, all project managers. It's a whole functioning media organization within the Red Hat Linux group. And they're just producing amazing stuff. They've got a hit podcast. They've got great thought leadership. They manage all the content for their executive center, for the executive PowerPoints that they do. And it's just an amazing growth story more than anything else, how they were able to scale something that was just this tiny little seed in someone's mind and has now become a full-fledged department for the organization.
It's interesting from a business perspective that, I guess there's a role for all kinds of different companies, but you come in, you advise, you give them the roadmap, which can lead to frustrations, right? If they don't follow the roadmap.
Well, yeah.
Sure. And that's one of the biggest challenges of content is that the actual creation of it, right? So,
it is the challenge. Yeah.
So is that a deliberate decision? Have you decided that we're not going to go into the actual production because it's fraught with danger and peril, or
Well,
what's the
I mean,
thinking behind that?
The one thing was I never, look, I've been doing this web thing for 25 years now. If I never build another website again, I'm a happy guy. I don't need to, there's little in me that needs to build another website in my life. And so building another blog or building, helping to build sort of the expression of that digital content was never high on my list anyway. The other thing is that I came from that world, right? I've worked at agencies, I've worked for consultancies, in the very early days, we were one of the, I worked for one of the bigger web agencies out there that built gigantic websites. And the thing that I learned, and it was something that I learned actually while I was the CMO of the software company, was, the execution of these things is basically, it's like being the general contractor on a house, right? You're rarely going to get credit when things go right, and you're always going to get the blame when things go wrong. So, there was little upside in that. And I will tell you, there is a con to that in my business model, which is my projects are short. They are measured in weeks. And so there's a feed the monster aspect to that, which is, when we say we've worked with 500 companies, and 100 of the Fortune 100, I have to work with a lot of companies because we have to continually do that. Now, we've added some additional things where we, stay on in coaching, and there are a few retained clients that we have, but we just decided early on that, there were plenty of very, 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 very talented agencies out there that can handle the execution. And we do content creation, but we only do content creation as it pertains to being a thought leader or influencer, if you will, in the scheme of content marketing and marketing. So, I do have clients like Adobe or Salesforce or, LinkedIn or somebody that wants to write a white paper around content marketing and, therein, and just sort of taking advantage of whatever notoriety I have in the marketplace on that. But that's the only execution type things that we're doing.
Yeah, that's fascinating, because I love that as in theory, that would be so much fun. But from a business standpoint, it's hard, right? Because if you see people not follow through on it, it's frustrating. That's kind of why we.
Oh yeah, it's exceedingly low. The number of people who actually follow our advice is exceedingly low.
Oh man,
and it's not because necessarily there's no desire there. It's just that in bigger and broader organizations, it's like change, yay, said nobody ever, right? I mean, so facilitating change management is a very, very hard thing to do. And it's not just our advice. It's really any sort of business process management change that comes in is just difficult. It's just, it's fraught for complexity and politics. And, I have said, it's like if I haven't uttered the term strategy or culture eats strategy for breakfast, it's at least a once a week utterance for me.
Right. Yeah, no, I love the idea of not doing the accountability that we do, for sure. That would be attractive to me. I want to ask you about your podcast. So you and Joe have been doing a podcast, and you're like the exception that meets the rule. Because most of the time when I talk to people that say, hey, okay, here's the idea. I'm thinking about starting a podcast. We have separate businesses, and we're just going to talk to one another, not going to interview anyone. I usually say, okay, that's a bad idea. But you guys are also obviously the exception that breaks the rule, meets the rule, whatever the word is, because you guys are going strong. So talk a little bit about what you cover on the podcast and why you approach it the way that you do.
Well, so we wanted to do just in the spirit of what we were talking about at the top of the show. We designed this old marketing to be sort of how can we get, a very early journey experience for people who've never heard of the term content marketing or content strategy or media or acting like a media company and all of that. And the whole conceit of the show was two things. Was one, we wanted to talk about surface the news in that, right? Because the ad ages and the ad weeks and, all of the industry rags were doing an awful job, still do an awful job. And I would go off on a rant on that, but do an awful job of surfacing all of the great, wonderful things that are happening in content marketing. So one, we wanted to do that. Two, we would have these weekly conversations, Joe and I, about the industry, where we would gossip about the industry and we would say snarky things. And we were like, this should be a show. The two of us just sort of criticizing and being snarky. And then 3, this is the real truth. It was an excuse for us to talk once a week because we were both really busy doing what we were doing. And we rarely got the chance to talk and just think and just sort of, and so it was an excuse for us, to have to read the news because many of times we just didn't. But we got to talk once a week. So those 3 things together, we said, let's make a show out of that. But the purpose, the sort of marketing purpose behind it was to drive people to be interested enough to go subscribe to the blog, right? That was our whole sort of marketing purpose. And then it grew and it started to get, some interest in it and, where we could actually have sponsors and, get paid a little bit of money for what we were doing. And we did that for, 7 years. And then when Joe sold the company, he wasn't sure whether he wanted to continue because he was thinking about his new business and all of that. And we said, well, we weren't, we had a very loyal, very awesome audience. And we didn't want to disappoint them. So instead of saying, well, we might be back in a year, Joe's going to take a year off and we might be back. And then we wouldn't, which would just make us feel awful about ourselves. We said, well, we're going to end the show. And we ended the show. And then basically Joe, after a year, said, let's bring it back. And because we were having a great time. We missed each other and it was fun. So we brought it back. And that was I will tell you, our biggest lesson learned was bringing a show back is almost more difficult than actually starting one from scratch because we lost a really large portion of our audience when we went away for a year. And we're still to this day now almost 2 years back trying to regain some of the audience that we actually lost. So it's a real lesson in content marketing about the value of consistency and longevity.
Yeah. All right. We're almost out of time. I want to wrap up by asking you about gratitude. I'm a big fan of gratitude. If you look around at your peers and contemporaries, others in your industry, however you want to define that, who do you respect? Who do you admire that's doing good work these days? Obviously, I think Joe's probably one of them, but anyone that comes to mind.
Well, that list is long. So as I mentioned in the beginning, I'm a student of marketing, always have been. And so I go back to some of the old guard, as it were, for most of what I look at. But I would say, yes, Joe Pulizzi is someone I have immense gratitude for. I mean, he changed my life. And the whole, us joining together really changed the trajectory of my career in ways that I'm still sort of dealing with. I would point to, from people that I really admire and the work they're doing. I've always loved the thinking of Jay Baer. He's one of the smartest guys out there. From a practical standpoint, from literally who's doing like the good practical roll up your sleeves, understand SEO, marketing tactics, understanding digital marketing. I point to a guy by the name of Andy Crestodina, who runs an agency called Orbit Media. And just, the advice that you get from them is unbelievable. From a thinking perspective, I point to a guy by the name of Roger Martin, who is a business professor out of Canada, who wrote a book called The Opposable Mind. He's just an amazing thinker and, quite frankly, one of the nicest guys. He's Canadian, right? He's required by law to be nice, but
yeah, it's in the Constitution.
He's wonderful. And then Rita Gunter Mcgrath is probably someone I would point to from a thought leadership perspective. I've read everything she's ever written. And she has a book called The End of Competitive Advantage, which is dog-eared and sitting on my desk. Rita Gunter Mcgrath is someone who, it doesn't matter what she says, I'm listening and watching it. I subscribe to her newsletter. I, read her books, and every time I could get a chance to see her speak, I would see her speak. So there's a few. Awesome. But that list goes on and on and on and on.
Well, you can put it in a comment in the show notes or something like that. So that
Sure.
Sounds awesome. But that was great. Robert, this has been so much fun. Where can people go to learn more about you and the work that you do?
If they're looking to connect on work, basically LinkedIn can be found there in a fair amount of frequency. And then our website is contentadvisory.net, which is, as I've been told, the dad genes of domains. But I think that fits me perfectly well.
I love that. And the blog is on there, right? They can get to the blog.
The blog is right
to
there.
The blog.
Yep, it's
right.
Yep.
Okay, cool. Go subscribe to everything that you can when you get over there. Robert, this has been so much fun. Thanks so much.
Absolutely a pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Smart Business Revolution podcast with John Corcoran. Find out more at smartbusinessrevolution.com. And while you're there, sign up for our email list and join the revolution.
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 And be listening for the next episode of the Smart Business Revolution podcast.